You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. 5 self-care obstacles, and my hope is that it made you realize maybe some of the ways that you're not taking care of yourself that you really didn't realize that you're doing. You have to practice. If you are uncomfortable taking time for you, don't start with a whole self-care day. That probably won't work. Start with small things. Hello there, and welcome to a new episode of the A Bit From Within podcast. My name is Felicia. I am your host, and every week I come here to share a little bit from within. As a self-care specialist and a certified astrologer, I like to talk about real self-care topics and issues, especially with a focus on resiliency and how we can use our perspective to make little shifts within ourselves, within our life that can lead to the changes that we need. So often that comes down to finding an alignment that works for us. I don't know about you, but I have often struggled with trying on things that work for other people or being stuck in a place of obligation or in trying to fit into other people's expectations. And that has brought me oftentimes further away from myself and yet also back to myself because it's taken me realizing what I'm not or what doesn't work for me to actually be honest with myself about what does work for me. So I am a huge advocate of remembering that what works for somebody else isn't the same thing that works for you, but sometimes just hearing those little bits of from within, those truths that we can all realize and recognize inside of ourselves in little and small ways can help you find your truth a little bit more, your heart center. And so that is what we're here to do today, maybe to help encourage you, inspire you, or at the very least, feel like you are having like a good heart-to-heart chat with a friend. There's so many times when I sit down to record this podcast that I wish that I was actually sitting here with you having a back and forth conversation. And whenever I sit down to record the podcast, I always picture the faces of the people who I know are listening and try to invite in all of the people that I don't know are listening as well, and just imagine what your face could look like or what your personality is like, and just feel into the things that you might be needing as well. So I really hope that we hit on some of those things. And if we do, please let me know. I am on Instagram at A Bit From Within. I'm on TikTok at Felicia Marty, Marti. And we also have a Patreon page. So if you want to use any of those mediums to shoot me a message or connect with me somehow, just to share how this has either made you think about something or brightened your day, please know that I listen to any and all forms of feedback. I love connecting with you guys. So please know I'm open to that. Today, we're going to be talking and deep diving into the subject of self-care and the self-care obstacles that so many of us run into and struggle with. I had been thinking about this a lot because on Saturday, we had one of our live yoga classes that I teach. This is through our Patreon page. Patreon is something that I started back in 2020 when the pandemic was going on. The yoga studio that I taught at shut down temporarily and then permanently. And I wanted a way to connect and still be practicing yoga even from home. So I started the Patreon page and kind of lumped everything I love doing in together. Yoga, meditation, and of course this podcast, and then all sorts of lunar self-care guides, which are basically like these mini digital magazine type thing. I try to make them as beautiful as possible that are filled with self-care support. So all of that happens on different levels through the Patreon, and twice a month, our community members get together and practice some yoga together. Those classes get recorded live so that yoga members can have access to all of the different gentle yoga classes that have been recorded. There's probably close to 100 classes now over the past 2 years, which is wild. But before we practice yoga, we get to sit and connect as a community. And it's one of my favorite parts of the month. And we start with, just one little topic and then just kind of see where it goes. And this month, I had known that different members have been, needing to reduce the anxiety. So that's what we started with the conversation with today. We're like, we're going to do some yoga to reduce anxiety, to kind of soften the heart space, make things a little bit easier, a little bit more grounded. But first, like, what is going on? And we ended up just having this really beautiful and important conversation about how challenging sometimes it can be to choose self-care and to choose yourself, or to step out of the norm of what you're used to or what you expect from yourself in order to take care of yourself. Sometimes that is a little bit more easier, straightforward, like towards the end of the day, like you have no energy and you're like, I really could make a healthy meal for myself, or I can just go through a drive-through or a quick food pickup, and that feels like self-care. That one's a little bit easier. But it gets a lot harder when you think about things like, somebody had mentioned the example of like, I had these big meetings. I told my friend I would call her. I went on a walk to go have that phone call. And as I got there, I just realized that I didn't need to talk, that I needed to be quiet. And how many times, I love this example because I feel like all of us can relate to that feeling of overriding that feeling within that says, I need quiet, because you've already set it in your mind that, well, you need to call this person, or you need to fulfill your to-do list today. And I think this is such an important and simple example, something we can all relate to, because we can all know what it feels like to override those cues from within. And this is where I think it's so important to have a balance between like our yin and our yang energy, because yang energy is very action focused, and yin energy is much more soft and adaptable. And when we are so used to being in yang energy and used to going and fulfilling and sticking to a schedule and accomplishing things, we don't really leave space for, having that moment where you realize, I need to be quiet right now. I need to actually receive some energy, or even talk about receiving. When we can find a quiet space to tune in, imagine all the things we can receive. We can receive energy. We can receive messages from the universe. We can process things more effectively. We can feel with our bodies or our spirit, or whatever, however you feel things, what the best next moves are for ourselves, for our families. We can show up more fully and more intuitively. And that is such an important place for all of us to be able to connect with. And actually this ties into something that I had been struggling with for the past, I feel like it's been a while. I feel like it's been at least the last 6 weeks or so. I am a person who is kind of like a perpetual projects around the house person. I am constantly kind of like reorganizing the linen closet, reshuffling all of the clothes around so that they're in like a really pretty order in the like actual closet. I'm always like going through the drawers in the bathroom or going through the kitchen, and I cycle through it so that I constantly have this feeling of order throughout the whole house. And I also really like to rearrange things. I think a lot of us have that feeling for just wanting to have new energy or flow from our environments and our home space. And the thing about our house that is something that I'm going to think about when I buy another house in the future is that in our house, how it is, there's very little room for changing things up. It's like in our living room space, there's only one place the TV can be, which really means there's like really only one way that makes sense to have the couch. There are other ways that don't make sense to have the couch that we could try, but I ultimately never choose them because it doesn't make sense. Same thing with our bedroom. And some of this also has to do a little bit with feng shui. I know enough about feng shui principles. And so like, for example, we have the wall that's on the same wall as our door we could put our bed on, but it's not good feng shui to not be able to see the door to your bedroom from where you sleep. So if you sleep on the same wall as your door, it's not as good feng shui. So that's like something I won't do. And so really there's only one other place to put the bed. And so I don't get a lot of opportunity to rearrange the furniture very often. We've gone through every possible rearranging of our office for both of our desks and workspaces, and that's probably the place we have the most flexibility. And even then, it's not that much. And it honestly all drives me crazy. But anyway, that's just a little bit of background to say that for the past 6 weeks, like I have not had any energy or motivation for doing what I just described, like keeping up with things. I feel like, I've kept up with, putting clothes away or, normal daily cleaning and stuff like that. But I just haven't had the bandwidth to like reorganize the pantry. In fact, right now, the pantry is still a freaking disaster. It's really bad, you guys. And I need to go through it all, but I just have not had the motivation. And I don't know how else to describe this, but I started to feel like I was breaking or like I was broken somehow. Like, I'm like, why am I not feeling in the mood to do these things? Like, what is going on with me? And in the back of my mind, I also just had to kind of be more gentle with myself and remind myself, like, well, you've got other things going on right now. You're focused on work. You're transitioning business ideas and daily like work, like full-time work. So there's been a lot going on. And so maybe have a little bit more grace with yourself. And I've been really working on that because going back to the conversation on overriding, in the past, I would have just been like, no, the pantry is out of control. I need to clean it now. And I would have just been exhausted and had no idea what I was doing and then just did it anyway because my anxiety would have been fueling me, or because I would have just been like, well, this is something I need to do to take care of myself. And instead, I feel like I've been in this period where it's not like it's been constant rest, which if it were, there would still be nothing wrong with that. It's just that like I've been in like a little bit of a hibernation when it comes to ideas around the house. Those have been dormant. And so as we're leading up towards Christmas, we are not, Christmas on November 1st kind of people. But we usually like to start decorating a little bit before Thanksgiving. And so I knew I wanted to wait until at least this past weekend before I started really pulling anything out. And then I started thinking like, okay, well, if we're going to, start doing everything for the holidays, well, then it's time first to really start deep cleaning. And so this weekend, it was just the perfect timing. I had the house to myself for a while and I really got on a roll. There's been some projects that I've been wanting to do, like a while ago when we put an accent wall in our bedroom. We also hung these sconces on either side of the bed with these like puck lights in them. And I'm getting really off topic, but I'll share this with you anyway. The sconces were beautiful and like a good idea, but they didn't share like much light. Like even on the brightest setting, it wasn't enough to like read or like use very often. So we just ended up like for over a year not using them. And so finally I decided, I'm like, this isn't enough. It's not worth it just to have them to not be functional. So it's time to take them off the wall. And so I patched up the holes. And we have also been wanting to possibly put this one piece of furniture that's been in our bedroom downstairs and then bring well, like I said, there's not many options for things. So the piece of furniture is a cedar chest from downstairs, bring it upstairs. And so I traded out those things and, vacuumed all of the edges, and then really needed to mop downstairs. So I got the mopping done and got laundry done. And I wanted to move some like art pieces to a different part of the house. So I did all of that. It was one of those days where everything comes together. And these are one of my favorite moments in life because as a person who gets very anxious when things aren't I'm going to use the word evolving for lack of a better word, because it's something that I'll circle back to why the word evolving is so important. It's like the house continues to evolve, right? Like it's like this living, breathing organism. It's always getting better. It moves with us. Like as our needs change, we want to make room for the Christmas tree, or we want to change things up. I take care of it and I clean it, and I am like, okay, side story. I had recorded this introduction to this podcast talking about how important it is for me to not be very like woo-woo, but what I'm about to say is very woo-woo, so I'm sorry. But I really feel like I tried to listen to the house. Like, what makes sense to you right now, house? Like, how should we have the furniture? How should we organize the books on this shelf? Like, and not just for like it being the best, but just the most that makes the most sense right now, because it does change. It changes as we settle. It changes as we change. And that's why, I think there's a bit of anxiety about evolution for me, or like things evolving, because I want to constantly be evolving for the best. That's why I am so interested in conversations like these on taking care of ourselves, and what kind of supportive resources are there, and how do they work, and what else is out there. And the more I've dived into my own astrology, the more I understand myself, the more I can understand others. These things are very important to me. So all of that said, it was so good to feel like that sensation, that energy again, where I could be very yang in my experience. Like yesterday was a major yang day. I got so much done, but I don't think that I could have had that experience, or that it all would have come together as well, if I hadn't honored that yin time, which I didn't recognize at that time. I thought I was broken, but really I was just really feeling into where I was, and I didn't have the answers yet. But I didn't need to have them yet, because I had them when I needed them, which happened to be this weekend. So all of that's kind of a rather long introduction to today's podcast, but it is part of what led to this topic for today, the self-care obstacles. There are such normal obstacles to self-care, and whether it's because we are overriding it with that sense of yang energy, or because we're uncomfortable with yin energy, or maybe we get stuck in the opposite places. There's plenty more reasons that I'm going to share with you. But first, let's go ahead and do our astro check-in. What is happening astrologically right now? Well, this week we are in our last quarter moon phase. So if you look up into the sky, we're going to be seeing that final quarter moving from half light down to pitch black, nothing, for next week's new moon, which is on the 23rd. So we're pretty much going to be having a new moon Thanksgiving next week, which I think is pretty cool. But this week, we're kind of in an interesting place, because last week was the lunar eclipse. Lots of feedback on how crazy that all was and how exhausting it was to go through an eclipse season. Definitely valid. And so now we move to this last quarter moon, where astrologically at both of the quarters, there's a square happening between, so a 90-degree angle in the zodiac between where the sun is and where the moon is. And those squares are usually a time where there's some friction happening, some tension. And what that manifests like at the last quarter moon is this feeling that, like, on the full moon, you got tons of information, you've got tons of illumination. Now you have to sort through that information and figure out what you actually need to do with it, because not everything is going to make sense right now. We are in a constant place of integration. And coming from a very creative background, I know what it's like to feel like when you have lots of ideas and then you have to keep editing your ideas. And so maybe that's more of like an easy way to think of the last quarter moon energy, is it's very much like an editing space. Okay, what do we need to keep with us, and what do we need to surrender and let go of? And that surrender or let go doesn't have to be forever, although it certainly can be. There are some times that we just need to be able to let go and say goodbye to things that don't serve us anymore, that just don't belong anymore. But sometimes we just need to be willing to put stuff on the back burner until it makes more sense for them. So these are things that you might feel this week, where it's okay to really be thinking about the things that you're ready to surrender on, the things that you're ready to let go on. And that could be, tangible things. It could be certain relationships. It could be certain habits. It could be certain expectations that you have for others or have for yourself. It could be things as well. It could literally be going through the closet and grabbing, 5 to 10 pieces of clothing that you have come to the end of the road with. And I think this is a place that sometimes creates fear for people. It's like we want new beginnings and we want a fresh start, but we're afraid to make the space needed in order to have that fresh start. We can't bring in a bunch of new stuff when we're trying to keep everything we already have. And so if you feel that fear of letting go, one, understand that that is totally okay. It doesn't make you bad. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be hard. It can be, for sure. And in order to have more space, in order to have new things come in, to have new inspiration, you've got to, make room for that. And so I think this is the time where you make the room, because next week, new moon in Sagittarius, we are moving into that brand new sun season. We've been in Scorpio for this past month, and next week we move into Sag. It's going to be a really wonderful time to really set some new intentions and to plant those seeds. And so think of this time, like I said, edit things, let go of things, till the soil, so to speak, make room, and prepare your heart and your mind and your space, like your physical space, whether that's your body or your home or your work environment, like whatever it is, whatever is up for you, make space. And if all of this makes you feel overwhelmed, like you have a lot to do, one, if you know what to do, then, just keep going. And two, if you don't know what to do and you feel like that's a lot to put on your shoulders, then I want you to remember that not everything looks like doing. Sometimes letting go looks like doing nothing. It is really sinking into that. So hopefully that's a good reminder as we move into this new week ahead. It is absolutely crazy to me that we are getting ready for the last full month of sun season in 2022. Sagittarius begins on November 22nd, and that will go until right before Christmas when Capricorn season begins, but that one carries us into the new year. So that is a little bit wild, just to really think that we're coming to the close of 2022 and we're on the horizon of 2023. In some ways, we are feeling that last quarter moon energy on the space of the year as well. And we are moving into the darkest part of the year. And so I think there's a lot of beauty with that. And it's cool just to sit and recognize that and to lean in to that energy. All right, guys, let's take a quick break and then we're going to come back and deep dive into these self-care obstacles that we all go through. Self-care obstacles and how to overcome them. So here's the thing I think is so important. We all know how good it is to take care of ourselves. Self-care culture is talked about all of the time. But what does it really mean? You guys know that the subject of self-care is one that I am extremely passionate about, and I am the first to tell and remind people that self-care is not just about going to a spa or getting a massage or going through Starbucks. Like, it is not some sort of capitalistic, what can you buy or invest in order to treat yourself? Do sometimes treats like mean self-care too? Yeah, they do. Like they can share features sometimes. But real self-care is about actually taking care of yourself and knowing what your needs are. And I will say that as I sat with this list, I realized that some of the biggest obstacles for self-care that we go back to that come up in many of these lists has to do with us really not knowing what our needs are or not knowing how to take care of ourselves. And then on top of it, not feeling like we're worthy of being taken care of. And so that's a lot to sit with. And so as you hear me go through each of these and share some ideas on how to start practicing or making space for some of these, I do want to just give a very gentle and encouraging reminder that you don't have to go out and change everything in a day. If you are struggling with a lot of self-worth issues or don't feel like you have this skill set right now with boundaries in your life, with other people who might be making you feel bad for choosing yourself, please know that you still belong in this conversation. Little changes add up to big changes. Okay. So, you don't have to start big. The last thing this list is black and white. Okay. Self-care does not have to be all or nothing. In fact, it should probably not be all or nothing because that wouldn't be realistic for the majority of our lives. So please keep those things in mind and just remember, you are worthy of being taken care of by you and by others, but especially by yourself. You are worth choosing. So that said, self-care obstacle number 1, this one I think is an important at spot number 1 is making everything else a priority. This one is really tricky, and it's the first place that I think we have to start with our self-care when you're not taking care of yourself. It's because whether you feel like you're choosing it or not, you are choosing to make everything else a priority except for yourself. And that can be really hard to accept or to a hard pill to swallow. But when you start taking care of yourself, you start realizing that you are a priority in your life and you have to be. And let's be honest, there are seasons of our life where other things are more of a priority, right? When you become a parent, it is very hard when you have a new little newborn baby at home to remember that you're a priority also. And you can't go spend the same amount of time that you can in other parts of your life when you have a little being that needs 24/7 care, right? That makes sense. But even in those times, how do you still take care of yourself? In what ways can you make yourself a priority? And it can change, right? There are certain times where meeting our basic needs is the biggest priority. Am I getting to bed at a healthy hour? Am I drinking water throughout the day? Am I getting as much sleep as I can when I can? Those are sometimes basic need priorities. Other times in our life, the priorities are less basic needs and more about our creativity or our self-expansion or our heart space or our bodies? How we're using our time? Are we aligning with our goals and our dreams? Those things matter too. And in order to do those things, you still have to do what is so hard for us to do, which is to actually make space in our lives for ourselves. I think this one is really tricky because of a few reasons. It is very easy to feel awkward or guilty about choosing yourself, especially when you've spent a lot of time and your habit becomes taking care of everybody else. It could be your spouse or your family or your parents or your kids, or, obviously people take up a big priority in our lives. And that can also mean like our boss, our jobs, it could be our home. We can honestly make anything else a priority except for ourselves. And so this is the first place that you have to start to practice reprioritizing and putting yourself on that priority list. And I think it's important to remember that this is a good place to take in information about possibly what's holding you back. When you start prioritizing yourself, you're like, I'm going to go on a date with myself tonight. You start to realize what's in the way of that. Is it somebody else making you feel guilty? A partner at home that's like, I don't want you to leave. I need this. I want that. Is it your inbox? Is it your work? Is it somebody else that is pulling at you in that way, whether they're actually saying something or whether that's just how you feel? Or is it a sense of, what's happening inside of yourself? Is it a feeling of like, no, I don't deserve to spend money on myself, or I don't deserve time off, or I don't even know what I would do with myself if I had a whole afternoon to myself? You can start to see that hole, then you can start to address it. And I will say that you have to practice. If you are uncomfortable taking time for you, don't start with a whole self-care day. That probably won't work or be something sustainable for you. If you are really the kind of person that has a lot of priorities in other areas or feels very drawn towards taking care of other people and not you, start with small things. Because what we want to try to do is get you to the point where it feels like choosing you actually feels like a reward, or like you feel the benefit of doing so. And sometimes you can't receive those benefits unless you just practice. And if the practicing feels too hard, or you're not rewarding yourself because you didn't accomplish the whole full day or the whole big thing, then you won't want to do it again soon. And if you only practice this 2 times a year, it's not going to feel very important. And so this is kind of something you have to start realizing we have to do more often and gradually increase, and that underneath it all, you are worth being your own priority, at least in some version. Okay, I have to move to the next one because so many of these kind of share themes. The next one is a little bit different though. The next self-care obstacle has to do with fearfulness. And I want to say that again, your fear is so valid. Sometimes fears come up when we start to take care of ourselves. And there's different kinds of fears, okay? Sometimes the fear comes from past trauma or shame that we felt. Maybe you decided to go out and do something for yourself, and then when you got home, somebody made you feel really bad for doing that. That is a legitimate experience that people have had, and that can be enough to make you not want to choose yourself. Another fearful thing that people have sometimes run into is that feeling of well, things will fall apart if I leave. So I can't even go to the bathroom by myself because the universe will fall apart. And whether that's reasonable or realistic, or it's how you feel, it's still a valid fear. And so that said, just because you're afraid and you have a lot of fear that comes up, it doesn't mean that it's not worth being like facing those fears as you feel ready to confront them. And I will say that, boundaries are really helpful with fearfulness. And you need courage too. You really do, because it can be really hard and vulnerable. And this is, again, the place where I invite you to start small and increase it over time. And to remember that, like, if for any reason you don't have people in your life who make you feel like supported in your self-care practices, don't practice in regards to those people. Because like, you don't want to add any more discomfort to a process that at this point, if you're struggling with self-care, is already uncomfortable for you. So like, if you need a like babysitter for your kids, and like you have a parent that would make you feel like horrible about them babysitting in order for you to go do something for yourself, like, either one, don't use those people as a babysitter. Like, see if you can find some other resources, ask around for really valuable candidates, something like that. Or, I mean, this sounds bad, but like, don't put them in the position to make you feel bad about it. Like, there are some situations, like, I'm usually a very 100% honesty kind of person. But when it comes to really bad boundaries, like, if you don't need to disclose all the details of what you're actually going to go do for yourself in order to not be shamed by somebody else, then I'm an advocate of that. So yes, just remember, like, practicing with supportive people, even having one friend who's really on the same page as you that can help encourage you to keep choosing yourself, like, find those people who support you. And if you don't feel like you have that in your life, then that might be a great thing to really hold like a wish or like a dream or a manifestation inside of yourself, like the intention for supportive allies to come into your life in whatever way they can, because we all need those people. Okay. Self-care obstacle number 3 is self-sabotage. Oh, this is it's a hard one, and it's important because when I was first thinking about fearfulness, I realized that sometimes, like, and that's why I talked about the fear in the previous one so legitimately, because it's so important. There are real cases of fear. And then there's self-sabotage, which can include sometimes making excuses for ourselves in the guise of fear. And I think this is important just to say it. Like, it's hard to be like sensitive around this, because we have to be willing to look at self-sabotage for what it is. And there are a lot of ways that we self-sabotage ourselves. Like, we make excuses, we procrastinate, we sometimes flat out actively choose the opposite of what we should be doing. Like, for example, like, we're really trying to work on our blood sugar and then we eat a ton of snacks right before bed, and like our body has no way of actually burning any of that off or using it, and so we end up spiking our blood sugar in the middle of the night. Like, that happens all of the time. Like, I mean, maybe not exactly that example all the time, but something like that. Sometimes our self-sabotaging behaviors are a very real problem that we have to be willing to face. And so 2 things with self-sabotage. 1, if you are doing self-sabotaging behaviors, like, just start to ask yourself on a regular basis, like, what is it that's blocking you from choosing self-care? And even if you don't have to actively act on the self-care because you're in a self-sabotage phase, knowing why you're not choosing it is so important. And you have to ask yourself this often, because there's probably many blockages, many reasons. It could be, I don't feel worthy. It could be, I don't feel like I have the time. It could be, I feel too much pressure. I don't feel like I'm good enough. I'm scared of what people will think of me if I make more money or if I lose weight. Like, there can be so much and so many different things underneath that. And usually there are real legitimate fears underneath the self-sabotage, mostly internal fears. So one, again, if you need support with those things, those are real and valid things. Go get the support you need. Two, if you are in the habit of self-sabotaging, one of the most important things you can remember is that just because you have this little thing of, ruining this all for yourself, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. So often I've seen it where people are like, well, no, I'm just going to mess it up anyway, so I shouldn't even get started. And that is not true. You have to put it into your muscle memory, the habit of taking care of yourself. That matters. And two, even if sometimes you do self-sabotage, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try, right? It doesn't mean that those times that you took really good care of yourself don't matter just because one of those days you did something against it. If you can get started with self-care, do it, try again, like be resilient in your pursuit of taking care of yourself. And eventually, hopefully, some of those self-sabotaging behaviors will start to lessen or break up around those things so that you can feel like you're not fighting it so hard. Okay, we have two more. Number 4 is your expectations may be too high. And this is a hard one to get called out on because usually when you have really high expectations, there's a sense of nobleness that comes with it. Like, well, they're high for good reason. Like, you've really thought this through. That's at least how it is for me. Like, when I get my expectations up too high, it's usually like some ego or some pride involved. And the truth is, like, an all or nothing mentality can be just as damaging as any of these other self-care obstacles. Like, having too high of expectations can literally be self-sabotage as well. But I think it's worth having it as its own category just because the example of how to fix this one is a little bit more unique. A lot of times, there's high expectations around your self-care activities. Like, well, I need more time to take care of myself because I have to have a whole day or a whole week or a whole afternoon, like however much time that you feel like you don't have. That is an example of your expectation for self-care being too high. Same thing with money or other resources. Like if you're like, well, self-care costs a lot and I can't afford that much. That is, again, a little bit of self-sabotage, and it's not true. It doesn't. Your expectations can come down, and there are plenty of ways to take care of yourself that are not a ton of time, that are not a lot of money. And so it's time to maybe readjust some of these expectations. You may not have an entire day to take care of yourself. You may not be able to go away to a spa and wear a robe and be pampered and have that be your form of self-care. But real self-care looks a lot of different ways. Like if you feel like real self-care has to do with eating really well, but like you are not a master chef and you don't have the money for a private chef, like because most of us don't, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to eat healthy or that you can't look at different ways. And this is where your expectations being too high is a sign that you need to tap into your creativity and look at things from a different perspective, because you can meal prep. This is something that I've seen. I don't do this myself. It's something that maybe someday I'll be able to embrace. But I've seen people that like do make ahead instant pot meals that they put in their freezer. They do it one day in a month and they make, 15 meals. That's more than half your dinners, right? Like there are so many ways that you can increase the things that take care of you. Even something like, this is a really silly example, but this is the one I was thinking about earlier. Like, I know that there's some people who are like bath snobs, and let's say like you live in an apartment, like most apartments or even like older houses, like they don't have like really nice bathtubs. They're not standalones. They're not in, really tall ceiling rooms with tons of natural light coming in, and like maybe you don't have a huge interior like decorated bathroom, and so it just doesn't feel like a space where you can relax. Does that mean that you should never take a bath or like never take that time to unwind? Like, I'm a big bath person. I love connecting with water, and so that's something that I like to use. Well, guess what? Well, maybe it's time to, one of the things that we did, really, truly, there's very little that could stop me from taking a bath personally, but I really wanted to create more ambiance because maybe that would help you get over that hump. I found these little rechargeable, what are they called? Like LED lights, basically. They're these little sticks, and I stuck them to the back of each of the shelves. And then when I go to take a bath, I can turn them on for an hour, and they just like glow beautiful, like warm light. It really dims it in there. It makes it feel so relaxing and so cozy. And they were really cheap. They were like less than $20, and they're rechargeable, so they don't run on any batteries. And all you have to do is charge them up once a week or so. Actually, I think they usually last me about like 2-3 weeks before I need to charge them. And you could always use candles and things like that as well, or you can get bath salts and essential oils, or heck, you could put like a sleep mask on while you're in the bath so that you can really just enjoy being in the water. Like, know what it is that is getting in your way. If your expectations should be like, okay, well, maybe someday I'll become a bath person when I'm in my next house, or when I'm on a vacation in an Airbnb at a nicer place. Like, well, that's also fine, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. You can look at it differently. And my hope is that you take that example and that you think of that in other areas of your life as well. Like, readjust those expectations. Do not be black and white about your self-care. It does not have to be perfect. If you don't have an entire day to like read a book or stretch out or do a full like yoga class, it doesn't mean that like 5 minutes of stretching wouldn't be good for you, right? Or other things like 5 minutes of decompressing, 5 minutes of meditating, 5 minutes of meal prepping for later in the night. Like, a little bit goes a long way. And these are great self-care starters. Like, start with, if you're not sure where to begin with these 5-minute self-care things. And then finally, we're going to end with self-care obstacle number 5. And we're ending kind of back to where we began in the very beginning, in a conversation around anxiety. Anxiety is a huge self-care obstacle. It can be very hard to step out of the anxiety to start to slow down enough to choose yourself. Anxiety can cause you to skip out on taking care of yourself. Like, this comes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast, this feeling of overriding what we need to do for ourselves because we either have other worries to get through or other tasks or other priorities. And what are we overriding, right? Like, for me, things that this is the one that I regularly struggle with. I will like not go out on a walk with the dog because I have an inbox I need to get through. Or like sometimes I'll be working on something and I'll ignore body cues like hunger or thirst, or even sometimes like going to the bathroom just because I'm like so focused on getting this thing done. Like, and that is 100% my anxiety that is running those moments. And so, I think that a lot of these come down to a little bit more of like our basic needs, but at the same time, this can also come into more than that. Like, you can be a person who really needs creativity, that really needs to create things like to sew or to quilt or to design or to read or to paint, whatever it is. And you could say like, oh, well, or you could be the kind of person similarly who like needs to move their body and like get outside or join a dance class, and you don't do it because of a sense of anxiety. Maybe it's fear of being around other people, or fearfulness of going into the store, or fearful of not knowing something, how to do something that you want to do. These are anxious thoughts that are holding you back. One, you can try and mess up and still be a good person. Two, you can try and get into something and it can not work out the first time and you can fix it. You can conquer these anxious thoughts that you have for yourself, and you can do that by doing it anyway. So obviously, I was just thinking about kind of some of those more like big examples, but especially when it comes to the little things, the little, moments like taking a movement break or meditating or drinking water or wearing your blue light glasses, like, the little things that we need to do to take better care of ourselves throughout the day. One thing you can do is like put a sticky note somewhere, like in the morning, be like, these are the things I'm committing to. I'm committing to drinking more water and taking regular movement breaks. And then stick that somewhere where you can see it. When your eyes go to it, like choose that instead. Don't get sucked in. Don't say, I'm going to get through this inbox first, or I'm going to go clean this room, and then after I finish that, then I can go have water, then I can go take a break. No. For you, for me, when we feel this way, we need to practice the opposite. Instead of sticking to something, we need to practice walking away and coming back and finishing it later. We need to remember that other things are a priority. And if this one is really resonating with you, then I also recommend checking out the last podcast that I had, which was all about letting go of a sense of urgency, because this is a definite self-care obstacle. So, we did it. We got through 5 self-care obstacles, and I hope that maybe, my hope is that it made you realize maybe some of the ways that you're not taking care of yourself that you really didn't realize that you're doing. Because I believe, like, if you were to ask me, I would say like the anxious one is probably the one where I am most aware of me not taking care of myself. But then there's other things on this list too that I'm dealing with. Like, I think fearfulness and self-sabotage, those are things that I don't recognize that I'm doing that are definitely getting in the way of my self-care. So please know that even as I share this with you, like, it's something that I'm working through. It's something that we're all working through. Even the people that you really look up to and you think they've got it all figured out, like, none of us do. None of us have it figured out. We are all in the middle of figuring it out. And part of the reason why is because our lives are constantly changing. We're constantly going through new obstacles in our life that like curveballs getting thrown at us that we have to readjust. And it takes effort. It takes time. So just take that deep breath. Give yourself like a big hug right now. And just remember, like, it's going to be okay. It is. That is the first place to remember. All right. I've gone on enough today. Let's do a card drawing, should we? I have this new card deck. It is something that is just absolutely perfect for me. It's so up my alley. And it was really fun because Dave actually picked this out for me, and it just ended up being such a great gift and perfect. Like, I'm obsessed with these cards. They're gorgeous. Okay, so the deck is called Star Codes Astro Oracle. It's by Heather Roan Robbins. And it has like a lot of astrological cards. So like the 12 zodiacs, but then also like the different aspects. And it's really cool. So I have no idea what we're going to get today. I'll read a little portion of what the card means from her guidebook. And we'll just see like how the universe wants to contribute to today's conversation through the cards. This is the Ascendant card. In a natal chart, the Ascendant tells a story about how you walked into this life at your birth and how you walk into any new situation. It describes the door through which you see the world and the world sees you, your filter system, and hints at your awakening consciousness. The Ascendant is where you become visible. If this makes you nervous, investigate what needs to be healed or where you need to grow your confidence in order to feel comfortable being seen. Well, I love that, and I think it's perfect as we talk about making ourselves a priority. We come back to ourselves, to our own identity, to how we experience the world, and maybe some little changes or shifts that need to be made so that we can show up more fully. All right, you guys, that is it for today. Thank you for joining. Please know that you can continue to connect on social media, or if you love this and you want to listen ad-free each week, you can join our Patreon page to support this work and to get our lunar self-care guides each and every month. We have a new one being released next week that will go over Sagittarius self-care ideas, have a new moon ritual for the new moon in Sagittarius, a full moon ritual for the full moon in Gemini in December, and just other things that will help support you as we prepare for the end of the year. And if you've never heard of Patreon before, one, that is totally okay. A lot of people don't know about it. It is a platform online for creators of all kinds where people can come and support their work through like a monthly fee, and then they get things in return. And so like what I give in return is the podcast ad-free and the lunar guide, guided meditations, the yoga classes, and it's a very simple to use and easy to use platform. It's really, really cool. So check that out. You can find my page on patreon.com/abitfromwithin. And yeah, I would love it if you checked it out. I will be back next week with a new episode. So however you are listening to this, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, or maybe even YouTube, please subscribe so you can tune in again next week. Thanks so much, and talk to you soon.